Imagine for a moment that you are standing before the light of dawn. I want you to feel that moment as a gentle invitation. There is no rush, no demands from the world outside, only a horizon quietly opening, soft yet full of strength. In that fragile morning light, you can see what the noise of midday often makes you overlook. The light does not try to prove anything, it simply exists, and its presence alone is enough to push back the darkness without arguing with it. In moments like this, I often realize more clearly than ever that peace does not come from having a perfect life, but from letting the mind find its quiet anchor within. In that place, the noise of the world steps back for a while. In that place, there is a timeless truth waiting to be seen. And that truth is simple but powerful. The world outside is never the starting point. Everything you see, every result you touch, every path you walk, has a much deeper cause. It begins in awareness, in a single thought, in a silent belief you may not even know you are carrying. When I stand before the light of dawn, I am reminded that the sunrise does not fight the night. It simply appears, and the darkness fades on its own. The mind works the same way. You do not need to battle old limits or old fears. You only need a spark of new awareness, and everything else will shift in its natural order. Dawn does not ask you to be strong. It only invites you to open your eyes. In the light of the early morning, I want you to realize one more thing. You are not separated from guidance, and you are not abandoned in the face of the challenges ahead. There is a deeper rhythm moving within you, a gentle but precise order that always begins inside before it flows outward. When you look back on your life, you will see that every real change began with a quiet moment like this. A small recognition, a new thought, a soft agreement in your heart that you can step out of the old path. And so I want to bring you into this journey not with promises, but with light. The light I believe you have glimpsed before, even for a brief moment, in times when life made you pause. That moment was not an accident. It was a calling. It was the quiet voice within you, reminding you that peace is never far. It has always been here, waiting for you to come home. When I first met Michael, he was the kind of person you could easily notice in the busy crowd of a modern city. He walked fast, talked fast, thought fast, and always carried in his eyes a tension that seemed to have become part of who he was. He worked in finance, lived among numbers that shifted with the rhythm of the market, and believed his future was as unstable as the charts he watched every day. He did not call it fear. He said it was responsibility, readiness, survival instinct. But beneath that polished surface, I could see an unnamed uneasiness, a fatigue he would never allow himself to admit. Michael often said he only wanted to feel safe. More money, more recognition, more guarantees. But the more he had, the more he feared losing. He chased the feeling of safety the way someone chases their own shadow. Each time he thought he reached it, it moved one step further away. One morning, on a business trip, Michael woke earlier than usual. There was no meeting waiting, no pressure to answer emails, so he stepped out onto the balcony of his hotel room and saw the early light settling gently over the distant rooftops. The city was still asleep, and in that rare quiet, his heart softened in a way he did not expect. He told me that in that moment he was not thinking about success or failure, or the people who expected something from him. He simply stood still. For the first time in years, he felt his own breath without anxiety tied to it. And in that simple moment, a question rose inside him. Why am I living as if the whole world is collapsing when the sunrise still arrives on time? Every single day, I want you to imagine that moment. A man running for years, convinced that safety is somewhere ahead in an achievement, a number, a recognition. And then, in a few seconds of stillness, he realized peace is not in what he chased, but in what he never turned back to see. He had never asked what his awareness was following. never examined the silent beliefs that quietly shaped how he lived, how he loved, how he measured himself. He focused on outcomes without touching the cause. The morning light became a gentle mirror, revealing what the hurried pace of life had always hidden. His fear did not come from circumstances, but from a belief he had carried for too long. The belief that he was only safe when he controlled everything. The belief that his worth depended on the number in his account. The belief that if he stopped, everything would fall apart. But here's the strange part. When he actually stopped, nothing fell apart. Only an old layer of fear began to crack, revealing a truth he had never allowed himself to touch. When Michael told me this, his voice softened as if he had finally put down a heavy bag he had carried for years. He said the sunrise that day did not just brighten the sky, it brightened something inside him. He realized a truth many of us forget. Provision is not out there. It is not running ahead of us waiting to be chased. It is the reflection of the awareness we nurture within. And when that awareness is filled with fear, life can only reflect the trembling shape of that fear. Michael stayed longer than he meant to. He watched the sky change colors and suddenly understood that for many years he had never truly witnessed a sunrise. His mind had always woken before his body. He had always started the day with anxiety as if it were a requirement for survival. But that morning he received not an answer, but a question. He asked himself, if everything I see is only the result, then what is the cause I am planting? What belief am I living? From what kind of light am I allowing to shape my life? I want to ask you the same, just as I asked Michael. Have you ever paused long enough to notice what thought is leading you? Have you ever found yourself chasing something without knowing why it matters so much? If you are listening to this moment, I want to thank you for being here. And I want to ask gently, have you ever, like Michael, mistaken the shadow for the source of light? There is something I have come to notice every time I walk with someone on their healing journey. People do not live in the world as it is, they live in the world as they believe it is. The world you see is not just an external picture, it is a mirror reflecting the exact horizon you have drawn inside your mind. And the strange thing is that most of those boundaries are not imposed by life, but quietly drawn by your own silent thoughts. Each person carries an inner horizon, wide or narrow, not because of circumstance, but because of how much they allow their awareness to open. I once saw Michael carry a very small horizon. He did not know this because inner limits always disguise themselves as external conditions. He said the work he was doing was the best he could ever achieve. He believed that his nature was to always worry. He thought safety existed only when he held on to what he could control. But when I asked him the simplest question, who told you that you can only come this far, he could not answer. Because the truth was that no one had said it. He had said it to himself. His fear whispered it to him every day so softly that he mistook it for the truth. I want you to pause for a moment and look at your own life. Every limit you have faced, every time you told yourself, I cannot go further, every moment you believed this must be my fate, they were only the borders of awareness you had unknowingly agreed to. Inside each of us, there is a second voice, the voice of old habits, of past hurts, of fear of rejection, of the low confidence that has been repeated too many times. That voice does not shout. It only whispers. But those whispers draw the walls you end up calling your life. I remember the moment Michael realized this. He said that when he stood before the sunrise that morning, he looked at the distant horizon and asked himself, why is the sky wider than any belief I have ever had about my life? The question sounded simple, but within that simplicity, something broke open. For the first time, he saw that the limits he carried were nothing like the sky. They were not vast, not open, not clear. They were only invisible lines he had drawn himself, and if he was the one who drew them, he could also be the one to erase them. I told him that awareness is like a dark room. If you stand in it long enough, you forget that outside there is a world full of light. Then one day you open a small window, and even a thin line of light is enough to show you that the wall is not endless. It is simply that you never tried to take one more step to see whether it was as solid as you believed. People often mistake temporary limits for permanent identity. They confuse a pattern repeated a few times with a destiny that cannot change. But destiny does not close before you. It only waits for you to widen your awareness so you can see a new path. Michael began to observe his life through this lens. He realized that in his work, he did not dare to take on bigger projects because he believed he was not good enough. In relationships, he kept his distance because he believed love was something fragile. In his personal growth, he assumed he already knew his limits, so he never tried anything beyond his safe circle. Every part of his life was operating under the small horizons he had built without knowing it. And when he looked closely, he saw that those limits came from small sentences. I am only this much. I am not good at that. I do not deserve that. I will fail if I try. Those sentences seemed harmless, but they were the stones that built his walls. The mind believes what it hears long enough. And once it believes, it does everything to maintain that belief, even when the belief hurts us. This is what I want you to understand clearly. You are not limited by circumstances. You are only limited by the beliefs you have not yet seen through. Once you see through them, they lose their power. The limit does not disappear at once, but it begins to crack. And through that crack, the light enters. I told Michael that the inner horizon can expand whenever you allow it to. You do not need a big event. You do not need a miracle. You only need a realization. You only need to tell yourself, maybe I have been seeing this wrong. Maybe I believed something untrue about who I am. Maybe life is wider than what I allowed myself to see. When you can say that, you create the first line of light, and from that line, a new space begins to form. What I want you to carry with you is this. Every ceiling you have ever hit in your life was only the ceiling of your belief. None of them belong to your true nature. That nature is like the limitless sky Michael saw that morning. You only forgot to look up. And now I invite you to do that. Look up. Ask yourself one question. How wide is the horizon within me, and even more important, did I choose it? When I tell someone that a thought is a seed, they often nod as if they already understand. But most understand with the mind, not with experience. Because if they truly understood, they would never plant a careless thought, just as a farmer would never throw seeds onto the ground and hope they grow into something good. A seed always carries the nature of the tree it will become. You cannot expect sweet fruit from a bitter seed. You cannot expect your life to bloom when inside you is filled with thoughts, bent under fear. But a seed does not become only a tree. It becomes a forest. A single thought, repeated long enough, does not create only one result. It creates an atmosphere. It changes the climate inside you. It shapes not just one action, but the entire tone of your life. I saw this very clearly in Michael. Before he became aware of his inner limits, he lived in a climate of tension no one else could see. His mind was filled with seeds of doubt and distrust. Those seeds grew into thickets of caution, vines of anxiety, deep roots of defensiveness. And because of that, even when opportunities came, he never truly welcomed them. He was standing inside a forest he had created himself, a forest so dense that light could barely enter. Our minds can become such forests if we do not know what we are planting. You may tell yourself that you only had a small negative thought, that it is harmless, that it does not matter. But the mind does not distinguish what is small or what is important. It only receives the seed and does what soil does it nourishes. The seed will grow, and when it grows, it brings its own climate. Fear grows into a forest of vigilance. Resentment grows into a forest of bitterness. Comparison grows into a forest of insecurity. And within each forest, a person begins to believe that reality is this way, when reality is only reflecting the climate they themselves created. I remember one time Michael asked me, "Why can one small thought affect my entire life?" I smiled and told him that what changes a life is not the size of the seed, but its loyalty. A small seed, if tended with attention, emotion, and repetition, can break stone to rise. The mind does not argue with you. It does not resist. It does not ask if you are sure. It only says, if this is what you believe, I will help it take shape in the world. This is why changing circumstances without changing thoughts is like trimming branches without touching the roots. You can cut away the gloom of a situation switch, jobs change, environments leave a relationship. But if the old seed is still in the soil, the old tree will grow again in another form. This is not judgment. It is simply law. And this law does not punish. It only operates precisely. Once I took Michael for a walk in a quiet park. There were tall trees rising straight and confident, as if they knew they were born to reach toward the sun. I told him that none of these trees grew because they were afraid they would not be strong enough. They grew because within the seed was already the image of a steady trunk, wide leaves, deep roots. I told him that the thoughts of a human being also carry a nature. A seed of peace always grows into peace. A seed of openness always grows into opportunity. A seed of gratitude always grows into abundance. And when you plant those seeds, even slowly, they still grow. They grow quietly without noise, but surely. But for them to grow, you must know what you are planting. You must look at the forest within and ask what kind of seeds created this. I want you to imagine something. If every thought you repeat today becomes the climate of your life tomorrow, which thoughts would you choose? Would you let the old seeds continue to grow over you? Or would you begin again? Remember that the forest inside you was created not by one large decision, but by hundreds of small ones. By thoughts repeated until they became habit. And in the same way, a new forest is created by small but steady choices. You do not need to change everything in one day. You only need to change the seed. One right seed can shift the entire climate within you. And that inner climate will change the landscape outside. When I look at Michael's journey, I see that the moment he changed was not when he had a big idea. It was when he dared to question the old seeds. When he dared to ask, is what I believe even true? Is what I am repeating still serving me? And most importantly, can I plant something else? I want you to ask the same today, because when you ask, you open the door. And when the door opens, the light enters. I have always believed that the inner life of a person is no different from a garden. And what matters most in that garden is not how big it is or how well you cared for it in the past, but what you are planting this morning. Each morning brings fresh soil, a new chance, a blank page you can write on with your thoughts and emotions. And even if you planted the wrong seeds for years, the soil still waits patiently for you to plant again. It does not judge, does not accuse, does not condemn. It simply says, give me the seed you want to see grow into your life. I will do the rest. When I began teaching Michael the practice of inner gardening, he was surprised by how simple it was. No complicated rituals, no overwhelming exercises, no fancy affirmations, just a small morning habit. I told him to choose one sentence, one thought seed short enough to remember, honest enough to believe, and strong enough that he wanted it to live inside him. A sentence like, I am planting peace in every action, or I choose to act from values instead of fear. The sentence did not need to be perfect. It only needed to be the right seed. The right seed is not the beautiful one, but the one aligned with your soul in that moment. Michael chose a simple sentence. I allow good things to come to me without needing to control everything. He said it felt like opening a small door in his heart. And I told him that is what every seed does, it opens a door. Each morning before the world rushed in, Michael wrote that sentence on a small piece of paper. I told him that writing is how you plant with your hands and repeating is how you plant with your heart. But the most important part was not the words, it was the action that followed. A seed does not sprout because you think about it. It grows when you create conditions for it to live. So each day, Michael chose one small action that matched that seed. A phone call he avoided because he feared making mistakes. A thank you, he hesitated to say. A decision made from peace instead of defense. He told me those actions felt tiny, insignificant compared to the big goals of his life. But I told him that a big tree does not ask you to do big things. It only asks for consistency, and consistency is built from small things. I want you to understand this clearly. Inner gardening is not fast change. It is not breaking fear in a day or lighting all your hope in an hour. It is patience, like the gardener who knows the soil is not trying to make things difficult. It only needs you to stop planting something and then standing there doubting it. Because doubt is like digging the soil, pulling the seed out to check if it has sprouted, and each time you do that, you wound what you want to grow. I told Michael that patience is not endurance, it is trust. Patience is standing beside the seed and saying, I am here. I wait for you. I believe in you. There were days when Michael came to me frustrated. He said he did not see any change. I smiled because I have seen this in so many people, and I always say the same thing. Not seeing does not mean nothing is happening. What truly changes always begins in silence. The seed sprouts before it rises above the ground. A new belief takes root before it shows results in the world. Nothing is dying. Everything is alive. You just do not see it yet. I told him that the silence of a seed is not failure, it is the most sacred stage of growth. A new root always grows downward before the trunk rises upward. There were also days when Michael said the old thoughts were coming back. Fear, doubt, comparison, the old emotions he thought were gone. I told him that is not a sign of going backward, but of moving forward. When the light grows stronger, the shadows appear more clearly. When new roots form, old soil is pushed out. Those emotions do not return to take over. They return so you can look at them and say the sentence your new seed has taught you. I no longer feed you. I choose another seed. That gentle refusal is one of the strongest acts in inner gardening. And now I want to say this directly to you, the one who is here with me. If you have truly stayed with me until this point, I want you to leave a small sign so I know the garden within you is also opening. You can comment, I am ready to change, or simply the number 1. Do not underestimate this small action. It is not an online ritual. It is the moment you say to yourself, I am agreeing to plant again. And that agreement is the beginning of every inner dawn. There was a time when I took Michael into a special room inside a small museum I often visited. The room was lined with mirrors on all 4 walls. There was nothing inside except the image of whoever stepped in. When Michael walked in, he stopped immediately. Everywhere he looked, he saw himself. Every small movement repeated countless times. I noticed the slight discomfort on his face. I asked him, if there is something in these mirrors that you are not satisfied with, where would you fix it? He thought for a moment and then said what almost everyone says the first time they enter that room. Maybe I would try to adjust the mirrors. I smiled. That is the reaction people often have with life. When they dislike something outside themselves, they try to touch the mirror. They get frustrated with circumstances, try to change others, try to adjust the environment, believing that if the reflection changes, life will change. But the mirror has no power to decide the image. It only reflects. It only carries out its single task faithfully. Reflection. I told Michael to stand still and look into one mirror. He said he saw the tension in his own face. I told him to try a small smile. And instantly the entire room changed. Not just one image, but dozens shifting at the same time. I said to him, "You did not touch any mirror. You only touched yourself." And every mirror followed. That is the law. And that law does not belong to this museum. It is the law of life. Whatever appears outside, you can only reflect who you are within. I remember Michael stood there for a long time without speaking. He was realizing what I had wanted him to understand all along. You cannot fix your life by fixing its surface. You cannot make the mirror reflect something else if your essence does not change. If the tension in your face makes the whole room feel heavy, changing where you stand will not help. Wherever you go, the image follows. Life operates the same way. When you change jobs, change homes, change friends, change partners, change goals, but the inner world still holds the same fear or same patterns, the new circumstances will soon bring the same familiar feeling. Not because you are trapped in fate, but because you are carrying the source of the projection. There is a mistake many people make. They believe circumstances are the culprit. They say they are unhappy because the job is wrong. The people around them do not understand them. The environment is too stressful. But circumstances are only mirrors. They do not create the image. They only report what you send. This is not to blame you, but to return something precious to you. Authority. Because if circumstances are the cause, you cannot do anything. But if circumstances are reflection, you always have a starting point. And that starting point is never out of reach. It is inside you. When I explained this to Michael, he said something I think many people have felt. If everything reflects me, does that mean I have to be perfect? I shook my head. No, you do not need to be perfect. You only need to be honest. The mirror does not ask for perfection. It only asks that you do not live halfway with yourself. When you live in defense, it reflects defense. When you live in trust, it reflects openness. When you live in lack, it reflects scarcity. When you shift to gratitude, it reflects opportunity. The mirror does not punish you. It only stays loyal. Michael asked me then, why does my life feel full of repetition? The same situations, relationships, ending the same way, pressure returning even after changing jobs. I told him, repetition is not a curse. It is simply the mirror saying you are bringing the same original into every room you enter. You change the stage, but not the actor. So the story remains the same. This became one of the most important moments in Michael's journey. He realized that the problem was not fixing each mirror. It was changing the expression he brought to the mirror. I told him about a friend of mine who changed careers 5 times in cities, 3 times, constantly shifting relationships, convinced that the problem was always the people around him. But everywhere he went, he felt overlooked, judged, dismissed. Only much later did he understand that he was the one carrying that fear, and the mirror of life only reflected it. When he changed the belief that he had to prove his worth, every interaction softened. Circumstances did not change dramatically, but the reflection did. I told Michael something I want to say to you as well. You do not need to fix every mirror in your life. You do not need to please everyone. You do not need to chase after each situation to repair it. You only need to pause as if standing before one mirror and gently change what you bring. When the inside shifts, the reflection follows. Without exception. That is not a miracle. It is the natural order of the mind. And then I asked Michael what I now want to ask you. If life is a room full of mirrors, what image are you bringing into it each day? What do you want the mirrors to reflect? And are you sending them that image? There are moments in life when you look at your reality and see an absence, an empty account, an empty calendar, a quiet room, a silence from someone you hoped would call. And you conclude that the lack is out there, as if it were a separate force with its own power, as if it were a verdict already signed. But I want you to know that lack, when looked at closely, is only an illusion magnified by a state of awareness that has begun to contract. When awareness contracts, the world contracts with it. It is like tightening the lens of a camera. The frame becomes narrow, not because the scenery has changed, but because the viewpoint has been compressed. Lack operates in the same way. It does not begin with the circumstances. It begins with how you look at them. I remember clearly the day Michael told me about a time when he felt life was turning away from him. His work slowed down, his income decreased, and all his efforts seemed to bring no results. He said it felt like standing in a room where every window was closed, the air thin and light, unable to find its way in. He believed that reality was lacking. But when I asked him what is missing, is it out there or in here, he fell silent. Because deep down he knew the answer. Life had not withdrawn from him. He had withdrawn from life out of fear. When fear appeared, he narrowed his beliefs. And when his beliefs narrowed, every door outside narrowed in response. Life only reflected the map of awareness he was carrying. You see, lack is not a solid reality. It is a conclusion. And that conclusion is usually made when you are exhausted or losing faith. But if you pause even a little, you will see that even in the darkest periods there are streams you have overlooked. Something is still with you, but you have not noticed it. Not because it is small, but because fear has covered your entire field of vision. I often use the image of nature to explain this. Look at a forest after winter. The surface is cold, the trees bare, the soil stiff and dry. If you look with only your eyes, you may think life is missing. But dig gently into the soil, and you will find moisture streams running beneath small buds, waiting for the right moment to rise. There is no lack, only quiet. The lack you feel is often that same quiet. Not the absence of supply, but the phase in which supply is preparing to change direction and come to you in a new form. But when you panic, you rush to conclude that you have been abandoned. And that conclusion makes your awareness contract once more, like closing the door of your heart before hearing the rest of the story. I told Michael that lack has no power of its own. It is only a shadow, and a shadow cannot exist unless a source of light is being blocked. When he believed he had to carry everything by himself to feel safe, the inner light was covered. The shadow of lack grew long and stretched across his path. But when he began changing his thoughts, that shadow shrank, not because he chased it away, but because the inner light grew stronger. Lack is not the enemy. It is the signal that invites you to look within and see which light has been hidden. There was a woman named Claire who once came to see me during a time of deep loneliness. She said love had disappeared from her life. I asked her 3 things. What seeds are you planting in your thoughts? What emotions are you watering them with? And what light are you using to see the world? She stayed silent for a long time. Then she admitted that every day she repeated sentences like, I am not good enough, no one wants to stay with me, I do not deserve happiness. Those sentences were the seeds. Self-blame was the water. Disappointment was the soil. And the result was that she stood in her own field and believed it was barren. I told her no field is barren once its owner chooses to plant again. Lack appears not to punish, but to remind that it is time to change the seed. You may ask, if lack is only a reflection, why does it hurt so much? Because it touches the part of you that was once wounded. It stirs old memories of rejection, abandonment, and diminished worth. Lack hurts not because it is real, but because it touches the place still unhealed. And for that reason, it can also become the doorway to healing. When you look at lack without turning away, you will see that it has no independent power. It is only the echo of a belief you can change at any moment. And then I asked Michael what I want to ask you today. What you call lack, is it truly lack, or is it the part of you that has closed out of fear? If you open gently, would life still feel as narrow as you think? Have you ever checked where the feeling of lack begins? From circumstances, or from a belief repeated for too long? Lack is not proof that life has turned away from you. It is a reminder that you have been looking at life with tired eyes. When you change the way you see, you will understand what nature always knows. Life has never been lacking. Only human awareness sometimes forgets the abundance that is always flowing around it as softly as breath. I still remember the first time I took Michael to sit in a small room with nothing but an oil lamp placed on an old wooden table. The flame was small, sometimes flickering, sometimes bright and steady. I asked him if he wanted this room to be brighter, what would you do? Without thinking, Michael said he would clean the glass or move the table closer. I nodded because that is what most of us do when we enter the dark rooms of our lives. We adjust the furniture, move things around, polish the surface, hoping that somehow the light will improve. Then I reached out and lifted the wick just a little. The flame immediately grew stronger, brighter. I asked Michael, "Do you see this?" The light did not change because I cleaned the glass. It changed because I touched the place where the light comes from. The human mind works exactly like that lamp. You can tidy your circumstances, rearrange your environment, change what is outside, but if the inner wick is weak, the light will always be dim. You can change jobs, partners, cities, goals, but as long as you have not touched the inner source of light, the darkness will find a way to return. Not to discourage you, but to remind you that you are looking in the wrong place. Light does not come from rearranging the objects in the room, but from adjusting the wick. Michael had spent years fixing the surface of his life. When work tired him, he changed jobs. When a relationship made him feel unsafe, he left it. When he felt lack, he chased more money. He fixed the layers outside, cleaned each mirror, replaced each door. But the flame inside him was still weak. It flickered with fear, pressure, and self-doubt he had never faced. And because of that, darkness never left him. It only changed shape. I sat with him and said people often mistake their experiences as the result of circumstances. But circumstances are only the glass. The source of light is awareness. If awareness is full of fear, darkness will appear under every form of your life. If awareness shines with trust, the light will pass through even the hardest situations. We are not freed by changing the context, but by shifting the frequency of the light coming from within. Michael looked at the lamp for a long time. He said that for years he had tried to upgrade everything in his life except himself. He tried to be better, more perfect, stronger, but he never asked the simplest question. What belief is driving me every morning? I told him each person lives by a single quiet sentence they repeat countless times. That sentence may be, I must control everything, or I am only safe when I try my hardest, or I cannot allow myself to fail. These sentences are like the oil for the lamp. If the oil is mixed with impurities, the light cannot be clear. If the core belief you live by is soaked in fear, the inner light will be weak, and the world will reflect that back to you. There is a very common mistake I have seen over many years walking with others. People believe that real change begins with action. They think that if they work harder, become more disciplined, push themselves more, then life will improve. But effort does not change the light. It only moves the objects in the room. You can work day and night, manage everything clean, every circumstance until you are exhausted. But if the core belief in you is still lack, every effort will lead you back to the same place. Not because you failed, but because the light inside you is shaping the same image. I asked Michael to try something. Each night before sleep, look into your mind and ask what kind of oil fueled my wick today. Gratitude or anxiety, trust or defensiveness, peace or comparison. Simply seeing this means you have already touched the wick. Because true light begins not from controlling everything, but from observing yourself. That observation is the first step of awakening. I told Michael the story of a man who believed life always treated him unfairly. He moved 3 times, changed jobs 4 times, but everywhere he went, he felt dismissed. One day he sat down and asked, "Why do I always look at the world with suspicious eyes?" And he discovered that deep inside he still believed he was not valuable enough. When he touched that belief, when he lifted the wick of his lamp even a little, the light changed. He did not need a fifth job change. He only needed to change the light shining from within. And the world, like every room filled with mirrors, changed in response. I want you to understand that turning inward is not avoidance. It is returning to the source. No one finds lasting guidance by running into the noise outside. Guidance always begins in stillness. Like the oil lamp, your light does not need to be big, only steady. When you touch the wick, when you change your deepest belief, everything outside rearranges itself around the new light. And I want to ask you, just as I asked Michael in that small room, are you fixing the glass or fixing the light? Are you exhausted from moving the objects in the room of your life, or have you touched the wick? If you pause for even a moment, you will know. And I believe that within you, there is always a source of light waiting to be adjusted. A light that wants to illuminate your path. A light that never goes out as long as you return to touch it. There is a special moment in every person's journey when they realize that life does not operate by randomness, but by a deeper order, a silent law that is absolutely precise. I have witnessed many people awaken in that moment, and I saw the same in Michael. He began to understand that everything he encountered in life was not the result of luck, favoritism, or fate, but the natural outcome of the level of awareness he carried. I told him that the law of the mind is not biased. It does not care who you are, what you have done, where you come from, or what you are hoping for. It is not moved by your desperation, and it is not softened by your pleading. It does only one thing. It responds honestly to the frequency of thought you hold the longest. What you think most, feel most deeply, and repeat most persistently is the signal you send into the space of your life. And life, like an energy field, simply echoes that frequency. I explained this to Michael using the image of a radio. If you tune to the right frequency, you hear the song you want. If you tune to the wrong one, you hear static. But no one blames the radio. The static is not because the station is trying to make things difficult for you. It is simply the result of you turning the knob in the wrong direction. The mind works exactly like this. When you maintain the frequency of fear, life cannot send you experiences of peace. When you tune your thoughts toward lack, you cannot hear the music of abundance. Not because life wants to deny you, simply because you are on the wrong channel. Michael was silent for a long time when I said this. He realized that for many years he had lived in confusion. He hoped for something his mind was not broadcasting. He wanted peace, but nurtured tension. He wanted openness, but held tight to defense. He wanted prosperity, but planted fear of failure. He lived like a man turning the radio knob with hope, but never paying attention to the frequency he was choosing. The beauty of the law of the mind is that it never changes. It is not moody. It does not help you when it feels like helping and abandon you when it feels tired. It is the most stable foundation in human life. And that stability gives you a power few people recognize. You can predict your future simply by observing the thoughts you are nurturing today. Not through superstition, not through fortune-telling, but through the precision of this law. Thoughts carry consequences. Beliefs take form. Emotions have pathways. Nothing in the mind is meaningless. Everything is recorded in the field of awareness and will appear at the right time as circumstances. I told Michael this not to make him fear that every small thought would cause chaos. The law responds only to thoughts that are fed with continuity. A passing worry does not create a reality, but a worry repeated each morning creates an atmosphere. That atmosphere shapes an attitude. The attitude shapes action. And action creates results. Nothing happens without a root. Even what you call coincidence, when seen clearly, arises from some pattern of thought. Michael asked me, what should I do when the frequency in me is old, and I do not know how to change it. I told him that changing frequency is not an act of force. It is an act of returning. When you realize you are broadcasting noise, you do not need to shout over it. You simply turn the knob gently. Changing awareness works the same way. You do not need to fight the old thought. You only need to choose a new one and maintain it quietly, but consistently. What you repeat long enough becomes the strongest signal. I remember telling him that everyone has a broadcasting center. That center lies in their heart. Anything they nurture from that center moves outward like ripples across water. But the ripples do not follow what you say you believe. They follow what you actually believe. People who say, "I believe in abundance," but live in the frequency of lack, are often confused when reality does not match their expectations. Because reality does not respond to words. It responds to belief. What awakened Michael most deeply was understanding that the law was never against him. It was never rigid. It was simply waiting for him to change the signal. And when the signal changed, life changed with it, without him having to force anything. One of the most beautiful aspects of the law of the mind is this. You do not need to pull the outcome toward you. You only need to change the cause and the outcome will find its way. And now I want to ask you the same question I asked Michael that afternoon. What frequency have you been broadcasting most in recent days? The frequency of worry or gratitude? The frequency of doubt or trust? The frequency of lack or abundance? If you look deeply, you will know. And once you know, you can begin to change it today. There is something I learned very early in my spiritual journey. Fear and doubt never enter a person's life by knocking loudly on the door. They arrive softly, almost without leaving a trace. They slip in like the cool air of late afternoon, seemingly harmless yet enough to make you pull your jacket tighter without knowing why you feel cold. Fear does not pound on your heart. It whispers very reasonable things. Doubt never shouts. It simply asks a small question. What if? And sometimes that one question is enough to make the flame of awareness flicker. To help him understand this, I told Michael the story of a woman named Laura, whom I had accompanied years before. Laura was gifted and intelligent, yet she always felt that her success was temporary. No matter how well she did, she believed that one day everything would fall apart, that she did not truly deserve anything good. We call this fear. But in truth, it is only an old belief that has not been healed. It is the echo of a long-forgotten experience, a memory the mind has recorded and continues to recreate through similar circumstances because it feels familiar. When I asked Laura what she feared most, she said she feared losing everything. When I asked more deeply, she admitted that she was actually afraid she did not have enough worth to keep anything. I told her that fear never tells you the truth. It only tells you the part of your memory that has not been healed. Doubt works the same way. It looks at the flame you are trying to keep alive and asks, is it strong enough? It looks at the seed you are planting and asks, will it grow? It looks at the new frequency you are choosing and asks, will you maintain it long enough? And when you listen to those questions, the flame begins to tremble. I told Michael that fear and doubt are not enemies. They are signals. They show you where you need to plant more light. When you learn to see them as messengers rather than threats, you will realize they come not to weaken you, but to reveal the places where you are meant to grow stronger. No tree grows without meeting wind. No light becomes steady without first flickering. No one keeps their faith without having it tested. And those tests are what help faith mature. In our private conversations, Michael said what exhausted him was not the circumstances, but the quiet thoughts inside. He could face challenges, he could face difficulties, but the hardest thing to face was the subtle question in his mind. Am I fooling myself? Am I enough? Will I fail again? I told him that the questions of doubt always begin with, am I? But the answers of truth begin with, I am. Am I? is the voice of fear. I am is the voice of the soul. I gave him a simple example. When you plant a seed in the soil, you do not stand over it asking, "Am I sure it will grow?" You simply let it grow. You protect it from harm. You water it with consistency. You give it time. You do not doubt it every hour. And if you doubt too much, the seed becomes damaged. The human mind is the same. It cannot flourish under the gaze of suspicion. It needs gentle and steady trust. I told Michael that when he feels fear returning, he should not push it away. Pushing it away is a form of fighting. Fighting only strengthens it. He only needs to observe it the way you watch a cloud drift by. He can say, "I see you, but I do not belong to you anymore." Then he returns to the belief he has chosen the way a gardener returns to the seed he is tending. When he did this for the first time, I saw the light on his face soften. He realized that strength is not in extinguishing fear, but in refusing to let fear decide the direction. One day he asked me, "Will I ever be free of fear completely?" I told him that the purpose of the journey is not to eliminate fear, but to stop letting it steer your life. Fear needs only a small place in you to exist, but light needs only a tiny opening to fill the room. The law of light is always stronger than darkness. A single match can overcome an entire dark room, and the light in your mind is just as powerful as long as you remember it is there. I want you to listen carefully to this. Doubt will come. Fear will return. But if you stand firm in the light you are choosing, they will fade into small whispers. They cannot define you. They cannot mislead you. They only remind you that you are moving in the right direction. When the mind shifts to a new frequency, the old one will try to call you back. Do not blame yourself for hearing it. Simply continue forward. Each time you choose light, the darkness weakens a little more. And then I looked into Michael's eyes, just as I want to look into yours now, and said, "When fear knocks on the door, which voice will you allow to answer for you? Your truth or your old memory? That answer will shape the light of your whole day." There is a stage that every person on the inner transformation journey must pass through, the stage of discipline. Not the rigid, forced, harsh kind. I am speaking of the quiet kind, the gentle but steady discipline, like the way an artist keeps their instrument in tune, or the way a gardener tends the soil each morning, even before a single sprout appears. True change does not come from moments of inspiration. It comes from intentional repetition. It comes from knowing clearly what you want to plant and staying loyal to that seed. Michael once told me that the hardest thing for him was not understanding the law, but living it. Understanding takes an afternoon. Living takes a lifetime. And I told him this is true of every spiritual principle. They do not show their power when you read them, but when you practice them in the most ordinary moments of your life. Not when everything is calm, but when the mind is trembling. Not in quiet hours, but in the middle of busyness. Not when you are full of faith, but when you feel most tempted to give up. That is when discipline becomes the pair of hands that carries you. I advised Michael to choose a guiding sentence to live by. A simple one, light, but strong enough to stand in the middle of chaotic thoughts. That sentence would become the quiet music beneath his entire day. It did not need to be poetic. It only needed to be true. He chose, "I live from cause, not from circumstance." I smiled because it was a beautiful sentence. It reminded him that he did not chase outcomes. He generated them. It reminded him that he was not a victim of life. He was the sower. It reminded him that nothing outside has more authority than the thought he nurtures within. From that day on, each morning, Michael read that sentence 3 times. Not loudly, not quickly, just slowly, letting the words sink into his body, letting his mind understand that this would be the primary frequency of his day. Then he stepped into life, not to see whether circumstances would obey him, but to see whether he would obey his own sentence. Because the true test always comes from within, not from outside. When a difficult email arrived, his mind wanted to react as it always had. But he remembered the guiding sentence, and instead of reacting, he responded with clarity. When an unexpected expense made him anxious, the sentence reminded him that circumstances do not define him. His belief does. So he breathed and held enough steadiness to act instead of panic. I often tell people learning to master their thoughts that mental discipline is not the effort to never think wrongly. That is impossible. The human mind is a living stream. It has large waves, small waves, and sudden winds carried by memories you did not ask for. But discipline is the ability to notice a wrong thought without allowing it to become a place you live in. Discipline is returning, choosing again, refusing to be carried too far away. I taught Michael a very simple practice one. He said changed the way he lived. Every day at noon, he stopped for 1 minute. Only one. He placed his hand on his chest and asked, is the energy I am carrying the same as the cause I want to sow? If not, he adjusted using his guiding sentence. In the afternoon, when work piled up and the mind was easily pulled into worry, he did the same. He did not need long hours of meditation. He only needed to return to the cause. Each return was a small adjustment of light, and those small adjustments changed the entire flow of his day. Michael also developed another habit. He wrote one single line each night, not about results, but about cause. He wrote, where today did I live my guiding sentence, and where did I forget it? The writing was not to judge himself. It was to recognize, because recognition is the gateway to change. You cannot change what you do not see. But once you see it, you have already walked half the way. I explained to him that the body also plays a role in inner discipline. When you are afraid, the body contracts. When you trust, the body opens. When you are impatient, your breath becomes short. When you are peaceful, your breath deepens. So whenever he noticed he had drifted away from his guiding sentence, he adjusted his breath before adjusting his thoughts. Because breath opens the door for the mind to return to the state where the guiding sentence can take root. When the body and the mind move together, you no longer need to force yourself. You simply align. And now we reach the most important part of this chapter. I want you, the one listening to these words, to take one small step. A gentle but meaningful step. Leave a comment to mark the moment you choose to plant again. You may write, I am ready to change, or simply the number 1. The action is small, but it is a declaration of awareness. It is the moment you tell yourself that you have stepped into inner gardening with intention. Because you see, discipline is not harshness. It is respect for yourself. It is the way you tend your inner garden with kindness. It is the gentle patience that allows every seed a chance to sprout. And when you return to the cause often enough, you will witness the most beautiful thing. You no longer try to live your guiding sentence. You become it. There is something I always pay close attention to in those going through inner transformation. The moment their inner world begins to unify is the moment their inner flow awakens. Not a loud or forceful flow, not an emotional burst or temporary excitement. The flow I am speaking of is subtle, like an underground stream moving beneath the earth, silent but powerful. You cannot see it with your eyes, but you feel it in the way your breath becomes steadier, in the way your body feels lighter, in the way your decisions become clear without effort. Michael began to feel this flow after practicing inner discipline for some time. He said that each morning when he woke up, he no longer felt the familiar heaviness he used to carry. Not because all his circumstances had changed, but because something inside him had found a steady direction. He was no longer pulled by hundreds of conflicting thoughts. His mind was no longer arguing with itself. And I told him that when the cause becomes singular, life stops revolving around collisions. When the mind does not resist itself, the outside world stops resisting you. I explained that flow does not come from controlling everything, but from no longer obstructing yourself. Most of human exhaustion does not come from work or responsibility, but from inner division. One part wants to move forward, another part wants to retreat. One part wants to trust, another part wants to defend. One part wants to open, another part wants to close. This division creates turbulence, drains energy, and makes your steps heavy even at the start of the day. But when you choose a clear cause and remain loyal to it, the parts inside you begin to move in the same direction. And when that happens, energy no longer leaks. It gathers and begins to move. There was a time I took Michael along a small stream. At the beginning, the water was weak, slipping thinly over rocks. But just a few meters later, where the land dipped and obstacles disappeared, the stream became stronger, smoother, and more focused. I told him the water did not gain strength because something was added. It gained strength because something was removed. The human mind is the same. You do not need more determination, more power, more effort. You simply need less self-obstruction. When you stop living in division, the inner flow rises on its own. Michael asked me, "How do I know when the flow has begun?" I told him that you will notice it through very small signs. You will catch yourself answering a phone call you used to avoid. You will forgive more easily, not because you tried, but because you no longer want to hold what weighs you down. You will act without fear dictating every step. Tasks you once postponed become simple. When the cause is unified, action becomes natural. And nature always carries strength. I shared with him a story about a man named Daniel whom I once knew. Daniel spent many years under pressure, not because life gave him too many problems, but because he always doubted his own decisions. Every step he took was pulled in two directions. One voice believed he could. The other said he did not deserve to. He lived between two opposite frequencies, and that split exhausted him more than any job ever could. One day, after a turning point in his life, he chose a single sentence to live by. I no longer go against my own nature. And as if a door opened, the things that had been difficult for him became clear. Not because life changed, but because he stopped dividing himself. I told Michael that inner flow is the state where thought, emotion, and action no longer contradict each other. When you say something, you feel it and you act according to it. That unity creates a special kind of energy I call forward force. It moves you forward without pressure. It leads you to opportunities you once thought were coincidences. It opens doors you could not see before because your mind was covered with the dust of fear and doubt. Flow is not luck. It is the natural result of alignment. And alignment comes when you choose one cause deep enough to keep your mind from scattering. When the cause is steady, life becomes light in a quiet, natural way. Not because problems vanish, but because you stop wasting energy fighting what is inside. Michael said that when the flow began, he felt as if his life was being softly arranged by something invisible. The people he needed appeared at the right time. Things he thought were difficult began to move with ease. And he asked me, "Is this a sign of a miracle?" I answered, "No. It is a sign of order. When your inner world lines up, the outer world finds its way to line up as well." And the final thing I want you to hear deeply is this. Inner flow is not reserved for a few extraordinary people. It belongs to anyone willing to stop resisting themselves. It does not ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be honest with the cause you choose. Just that is enough to open the door to a stream of energy you may have forgotten you once had. I watched Michael closely during the period when his inner flow began to move. And I noticed something I have seen in many people who cross this threshold. Their actions become strangely simple. Not simple because they have fewer things to do, but simple because they no longer do what does not belong to them. They no longer try to convince others to think well of them. They no longer chase validation. They no longer run after noise. When the inside becomes clear, they act at the right time in the right way, and most importantly, they act from within instead of reacting from fear. One day, Michael told me that he used to delay important calls. Not because he was busy, but because he feared rejection, feared hearing the word no. Each time he faced that possibility, his body tightened and his mind slipped into defense. But when his inner flow awakened, he said the delay disappeared without him having to force himself forward. His guiding sentence each morning, "I live from cause, not from circumstance," made actions that once felt frightening become natural. He said, "I do not need courage. I only need alignment. When the inside is clear, the outside cannot overpower me." I smiled because that is the essence of pure action. Pure action is action not stained by fear, not pulled by anxiety, not pushed by a sense of lack. It is not action taken to prove anything. It is action born from a stable inner cause that gives it weight, strength, and direction. Quiet, undramatic, but steady. I told Michael about a potter I once met. The old man had hands that trembled slightly with age, yet each vase he made was astonishingly perfect. I asked him about his secret. He smiled and said, "My hands tremble, but my mind does not. When I am truly present with the clay, it listens to me. When my mind does not argue, the clay does not resist." That became one of the deepest lessons I have ever received. Action does not need a perfect body. It needs a whole awareness. Michael slowly understood that when inner flow is active, right action comes like a natural step. He no longer needed to create long plans to compensate for fear. He did not need long lists to push himself forward. He felt as if a quiet force within him was leading him, step by step, not rushing, but not stepping back. Even the difficult things felt lighter, not because they vanished, but because he no longer had to carry them alone. His inner world had stopped resisting him. I explained that every effective action is the result of a clear cause. When a cause is covered by fear, your action has two opposite forces. One pulls you forward and one pulls you back. These two forces exhaust you. That is why some days you work hard yet feel no progress. Not because you lack effort, but because you are moving in two directions at once. But when the cause is stable, each step moves in the same direction. No energy is wasted. There are no tiring loops. There is no feeling of running but staying still. Michael began to notice that inner clarity changed the way he communicated. He said that before every conversation with colleagues made him tense. He always wondered how to respond correctly, how not to upset anyone, how not to make a mistake. But when he lived from cause instead of circumstance, his voice changed. It became steadier, slower, clearer. He no longer feared revealing the truth. He said he no longer needed to decorate his words. He only needed to be present. And when he was present, people naturally listened. I told him this is the sign of pure action. When you no longer fear failure, you act more precisely. When you no longer fear judgment, you act from truth. When you no longer fear lack, you open to choices you once refused to see. Pure action always expands life. Action driven by fear always narrows it. One afternoon, Michael asked me whether he could fully trust his inner flow. I told him he did not need to trust fully in one moment. He only needed to trust little by little. Trust the next step. Trust the small action. Trust one honest decision today. When you see the results, the trust grows on its own. Like light spreading through a dark room, you do not have to open all windows at once. One crack of light is enough. The light will take care of the rest. I reminded him that pure action is not big action. Sometimes it is simply a timely apology, an email sent without exaggeration, a short pause to bring the mind back to the cause, a small but honest decision, a quiet but consistent step. These things gathered over time create a new flow for an entire life. Finally, I looked at Michael and said what I want to say to you now. When the inside becomes clear, you do not need to push life. Life opens on its own. You only need to walk in the direction your inner light is already showing. There is a truth I always remind anyone stepping into the journey of inner transformation. The deepest change does not happen on the easy days. It happens on the days you are tested. The days when circumstances suddenly become unpredictable. The days when results do not appear the way you hoped. The days when everything seems to return to its old shape. It is in those very moments that the cause you have planted is tested, not by life, but by your own mind. Michael came to see me one afternoon, looking tired. He said that even though he had held his cause focused on his inner light and tended his inner garden, he still faced situations that made him doubt himself. An important contract was delayed. A colleague misunderstood his words. An unexpected expense showed up just when he thought his finances were stabilizing. These things happened one after another enough to confuse him. He asked me, "Have I done something wrong?" I looked at him and said, "No. This is the moment you are doing it right. I want you to understand this deeply. When you change the cause, circumstances will adjust. But that adjustment does not always arrive smoothly or immediately. Old pieces need to fall away. Old patterns need to dissolve. Old misalignments need to be corrected. And that can create the feeling that life is shaking. But it does not shake to frighten you. It shakes to reorganize. Like a musician tuning an instrument. To make the sound pure, the strings must be tightened or loosened, and sometimes the process sounds unpleasant. But it is necessary for harmony to appear. When I explained this to Michael, I told him the story of a man I once guided. He longed for stability, yet every time a new opportunity appeared, he experienced small disruptions that made him think he was going in the wrong direction. I told him that sometimes these disruptions are not signs of mistakes, but signs of transition. When you move house, your belongings do not fall into place instantly. When you shift frequency, the things that once matched you begin to fall away. Change always creates static before it becomes clear. Michael listened for a long time. He said the hardest part was not the circumstances, but the feeling of going backward. He was used to measuring progress by results, but I told him that in the inner world, results are not the first sign. The first sign is the stability of your cause. If your cause is steady, you are not going backward. You are simply walking through a narrow passage, and a narrow passage always comes before a wide open space. I told him that steadfastness is not stubbornness. It is the trust that the cause you planted will bring the right effect at the right time. And that effect cannot come sooner while you are still holding old beliefs. When Michael heard this, he exhaled as if putting down an invisible weight. He said he understood now. Not every tremor is a threat. Some tremors are invitations. I took him outside and pointed to a small maple tree standing in the wind. Its trunk leaned with each strong gust, but as soon as the wind passed, it stood straight again. I said its strength is not in its rigidity. It is in its flexibility. When you know your cause is true, you will stand like that tree. You may lean, but you will not break. You may sway, but you will not lose your root. Steadfastness is not being untouched by circumstances. It is not letting circumstances determine your direction. Michael asked me, "So what should I do when everything becomes messy?" I said, "Simply return to the cause. The cause is the only anchor that does not move. When you return to it, your mind resets like a compass needle turning back to north, no matter how you twist it. And when the mind resets, your actions shift. And when actions shift, circumstances eventually follow. I want you to know that steadfastness does not require you to be strong all day. It only asks you not to give up in the moments when you think you are falling behind. Sometimes falling behind is only a step that prepares you. a small retreat to gather momentum, a pause that shows you what still needs to be released. And now I want to ask you, the one listening to me in this part, has something recently made you feel like life is shaking you a little? If so, do you think it is a sign of a wrong direction, or is it an invitation to stand more firmly in the cause you have chosen? Take a few seconds to ask yourself. And thank you for being here, because that tells me you are walking your path with sincerity. There is a moment in the journey of every person when, after practicing long enough, deep enough, quietly enough, even though they demand nothing from life, life begins to respond. Not with fireworks, not with dramatic signs, but with movements so subtle that without sensitivity you might overlook them. A door opens. A call arrives at the perfect moment. A problem resolves on its own. Someone who was once distant softens. An opportunity appears just when you stop searching with urgency. This is how effect enters a life quietly, naturally, without force. Effect never shows up as a random gift. It appears when the inner cause has matured. Michael began to notice this after staying loyal to his cause for a long time. He did not count days. He did not measure progress. He simply lived each morning, each hour, each step with honesty. He returned to his guiding sentence whenever he felt pulled away. He breathed deeply whenever fear tried to enter. He stayed neutral when circumstances tested him. And then one day he said to me, "I do not know what has happened, but something is opening around me." He told me that a project he had pursued for months suddenly moved forward after one short meeting. Someone he thought had drifted away sent him an important message. A sum of money arrived exactly when he needed it, not as a reward but as a natural flow of life. I smiled because none of this surprised me. When a cause has matured, effect does not come in response to worry. It comes in response to readiness. I told him it is like planting a seed in spring. You do not need to watch it every day. You do not need to pull the leaves to make them grow faster. You do not tap on the soil to check. You simply tend it. You water it steadily. You keep the soil free of weeds. You let the rain play its part and the sun play its part. And one morning, when you are not looking, the sprout appears. Quiet, unhurried, but certain. Life works the same way. You do not push effect. You create the conditions for effect to appear on its own. Michael asked, "So does this mean I have done enough?" I said, "It is not about enough or not enough. What matters is that it is right. Effect is never a reward for effort. It is the natural response to a pure cause. When you remove inner conflict, remove doubt, remove the opposing forces within yourself, life is no longer chaotic. It begins to align. It becomes coherent. It begins to feel like there is a guiding current, but truly, it is only the harmony between the inner and the outer. A woman named Grace once told me a beautiful story. She had tried to find a new direction in her career, but every attempt led to a dead end. Only when she stopped, turned inward, chose a cause that felt true, and lived from that cause with steadiness, did everything shift. Not because the world suddenly improved, but because she no longer sent out a chaotic signal. When the signal is clear, opportunity knows how to find its way. When the signal is pure, false paths fall away. When the signal is strong, the right things come closer. That is not magic. That is the physics of the mind. Michael began to understand that effect is not something you chase. It is something you allow. And you only allow it when you stop sending mixed commands from within. When you want to move forward but fear stepping. When you want openness but cling to defense. When you want abundance but think constantly about lack. These are the moments when you broadcast two frequencies at once, and life does not know which one to respond to. But when you hold one cause, life is no longer confused. It knows what to do, and it does. I told him that true effect always has three signs. First, it arrives without asking you to trade away your peace. Second, it arrives without requiring you to pretend to be strong. Third, it arrives in a way that makes you more yourself, not less. If something comes to you but makes you tense, unsettled, or untrue to yourself, that is not affect. That is struggle. And struggle always comes from a cause that is not pure. Michael said the thing that moved him most was not the outcomes themselves, but the feeling that he no longer feared losing them. I told him that this is the sign of inner maturity. When you no longer fear losing what you have, it means you have begun to understand something deep. Effect does not come from outside you. It comes from you. It comes from the light you maintain. It comes from the cause you nourish. And if the cause remains, effect will always find its way back. I ended by telling him the sentence he wrote down that day. When the cause is ripe, effect cannot not arrive. Not because it is forced, but because it is called. When I look back at the entire journey we have walked together, the first thing that appears in my mind is not the challenges you faced, not the fears you confronted, not the moments you felt lost. What I see most clearly is the light. The light you sometimes forget is within you. The light that life made you doubt on certain days. The light you once thought you had lost long ago. But I have always seen it, and I have seen it grow with every step you took. I have watched many people enter this path with trembling hearts and leave it with a calmness that surprises even them. Not because they became stronger in the way the world often defines strength, but because they realized the real strength had never left them. It was only covered by layers of fear, unhealed memories, and limits they believed were truths, but were only echoes of old days. I want to share something personal with you. Every time I see someone touch the truth that consciousness is the cause, and life is only the reflection, I feel as if I am witnessing a sunrise. Not the sunrise of the outer world, but the sunrise inside a human mind. A light that does not depend on weather, does not depend on circumstances, and cannot be extinguished by uncertainty. A light that only waits to be recognized. I have spent years wondering why sunrise has such a special beauty, and I realized its beauty does not come only from new light. It also comes from the way darkness yields. In that moment you see a law of life. Light does not fight. It only appears. And when it appears, darkness fades. I share this not as a metaphor, but as a real observation of human life. When you return to the right cause within you, no longer need to fight what once exhausted you. You no longer chase approval. You no longer adjust every small piece of circumstance. You no longer try to hold everything as if it could leave at any moment. When the light in you becomes whole, you live with a peace you once believed only the fortunate could have. But now you know. Peace does not come from luck. It comes from your agreement with the light inside you. I remember Michael once looked at me and said he could not believe that what he had been searching for all these years was inside him. I told him that this was not something he had discovered. It was something he had remembered, because no one enters life without light. But as people grow, they learn to believe in darkness. They believe lack is real. They believe uncertainty is their nature. They believe they must compete to survive. They believe that if they are not careful, life will turn away from them. But when they remember the inner light, those beliefs fall from them like autumn leaves. Not dramatically, not forcefully. They simply become unnecessary. Now, as I look at you through these final words, I want you to know something. You are no longer at the beginning. You have walked through the shadow of doubt. You have learned to plant again. You have watched your inner conflict dissolve. You have lived days where the cause was steadier than the circumstance. And you have seen life reflect that. You have walked far enough to know this is not theory. This is experience. This is truth inside your own life. I want you to hear this slowly. Within you, there is a place that circumstances cannot touch. a place not wounded by rejection, not shaken by worry, not disturbed by change, a place that does not belong to time. I call that place the source of light, and you have begun to live from that source. You have learned to return to it. You have begun to breathe from it. You have begun to let your actions follow its guidance. And the most beautiful thing about this source is that when you live from it, you no longer fear darkness. Not because darkness disappears, but because you know it has no power over you. Today, I want you to step out of this journey, not as someone who has finished learning something, but as someone who has remembered what they always knew. You do not need to seek guidance outside as much as before. Guidance is already within you, and you know you can touch it at any moment. With a single breath, with a quiet pause, with a guiding sentence whispered in your heart, and the light will appear again. Let me offer these last words as a gentle blessing. Life will bring more challenges, but you will not walk as you once did. You now have the source of light, and the source of light will never leave you, because it is you.